They say a mother knows best, but even she hoped she was wrong when she said her son might kill someone one day. And when that day finally came, the truth was far worse than anyone imagined.
This tragedy came as a shock to this usually quiet community.
We can always do more, I'm sure. And I did feel that. I thought, I know these people, and I didn't even know that there were these problems, apparently, that they were having.
On June 18th, 2025, a woman called 911 to report a domestic dispute with her husband. Her voice was tense, but calm enough to explain what was happening. Then, without warning, the call took a terrifying turn. Several loud gunshots rang out. The line went silent. That was all it took. Within minutes, police and emergency responders were speeding toward a quiet home on South Road in Grafton, New York. When officers arrived, they found a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The woman who made the call was lying outside the house, dead. The front yard, once peaceful and quiet, had become the first sign that something had gone horribly wrong. And once they stepped inside, it only got worse. 2 more bodies were discovered, both family members. At first, no one understood what had happened. But it didn't take long to realize this wasn't a break-in or some random act of violence. It was something far more personal. And the most chilling part? The suspect was still at the scene. He stood there holding the weapon, refusing to drop it, almost as if he had nothing left to lose. And you can only ask, how on earth did it come to this? To even begin to answer that question, let's get to know the family involved in this case, the Fowler family. By all accounts, they were just another household in the quiet town of Grafton, New York. The kind of family you'd nod to at the grocery store, maybe pass on the road without a second thought. They lived on South Road, tucked away behind a modest stretch of trees, in a home that had stood for years and weathered seasons. Now, Grafton isn't the kind of town that ends up on the evening news. There are no towering buildings, no constant traffic, no flashing lights. Life moves slow here. Families tend to stay for generations. On top of that, people here don't like drama, and when they do notice something off, they prefer to talk about it quietly, behind closed doors, over coffee, maybe while picking up their mail. Which is why the Fowler family, as familiar as they seemed, never raised many eyebrows. Not until it was too late. Inside that home lived 4 people: 26-year-old Joshua Fowler, his 27-year-old wife Whitney, his father Wilson, who was 55, and his maternal grandmother, Anita Crandall, who was 69. There was also a 5th family member, unnamed in official reports, who lived in the home but happened to be away the night everything went wrong. Joshua Fowler was born and raised in that very house. Locals remember him as a quiet kid, never one to stir up trouble but also not particularly social. He wasn't the type to hang out at the corner store or join the town's small events. In school, teachers described him as average, polite but distant. He kept to himself, rarely spoke unless spoken to, and seemed to live in his own world. Some chalked it up to shyness. Others suspected something deeper. But in a town like Grafton, where mental health wasn't always openly discussed, no one pushed too hard to find out. He eventually graduated, didn't pursue college, and stayed at home with his father and grandmother. People figured he was just one of those small-town guys who never really left. What most people didn't know was that Joshua's mother, Eleanor, had been worried for a long time. She and Wilson had separated years earlier, and she eventually moved out of state. But even from afar, she sensed something was wrong. As far back as his teenage years, she noticed her son's mood swings, his outbursts, and the way he would go eerily silent during conversations. She once told Wilson, in no uncertain terms, "He's going to kill someone someday." It wasn't a dramatic accusation. It was a genuine fear. But Wilson didn't believe her, or if he did, he never let it show. He believed Joshua just needed structure, discipline, a strong hand. That's how Wilson was raised, and that's how he tried to raise his son. But Joshua wasn't responding, and instead of getting help, the issues were buried beneath layers of silence and shame. Additionally, Anita Crandall had been living in the house for nearly a decade, and just like his grandson, she was quiet, kept to herself, and spent most of her time inside. Friends described her as gentle and old-fashioned. She rarely intervened in the household's affairs and seemed to avoid conflict whenever possible. Then came Whitney. Whitney Fowler, born Whitney Lundgren, was everything Joshua wasn't. She was ambitious, kind, and full of life. Her father, Wayne Lundgren, described her as someone who wouldn't even hurt a fly. She had recently completed a degree and had dreams of becoming a nurse. She loved helping others and had always believed in second chances. When she met Joshua, many who knew her were surprised. She was outgoing, he was withdrawn. She was goal-driven, he seemed stuck. But love has its own logic. She saw something in him, something worth holding on to. And maybe in the beginning, he made her feel like he was changing. They dated for a while, and despite some concerns from her family, she moved in with him. Eventually, they got married. But not long after, the cracks began to show. Whitney never said much directly. She wasn't the type to overshare. But there were moments, late-night phone calls, tired voices, subtle hints, that suggested she wasn't as happy as she pretended to be. She would tell her father little things, that Joshua was having a rough week, that he'd been upset over something small, that she was giving him space. She didn't say he scared her, not exactly, but her silence said enough. Wayne began to worry. He encouraged her to leave, to move out if she felt unsafe. She told him she had looked into shelters, just in case. But each time she stayed. Police were first called to the Fowler home in July of 2018 after a fight between Joshua and Wilson. Things had gotten heated, loud enough for someone to call the cops. When officers arrived, the family downplayed it, saying it was just a disagreement, nothing serious, no arrests were made. Then again, in October of 2021, there was another call, this time involving Joshua and Whitney. Similar story. Tension, shouting, someone worried enough to call it in. But again, no charges, no follow-ups, no real intervention, just temporary calm, followed by silence. And that's what made everything feel so normal. The Fowlers didn't cause trouble in the way people usually define it. There were no broken windows, no flashing lights, just the quiet hum of dysfunction. By the spring of 2025, Whitney was growing tired. Those closest to her said she seemed more distant than usual, more guarded. She wasn't the bubbly woman she used to be. The spark in her voice had dimmed. She spent more time at home, less time out with friends, and when she did go out, she often checked her phone or seemed distracted. It wasn't one moment that made everything clear. It was a pattern of someone shrinking in their own life. Joshua, meanwhile, had grown more isolated. He wasn't working. He barely left the house. He spent long hours in his room or pacing around the property. Some days, he'd sit outside on the porch for hours without saying a word to anyone. He didn't speak to neighbors. He didn't look for work. He didn't seem to have any plans at all. Those living nearby noticed the change. but chalked it up to stress, depression, maybe a rough patch. After all, who didn't go through hard times? But Joshua's hard times were different. They had teeth. They clung to him like shadows that no one else could see. In the days leading up to June 18th, there were no new police reports, no loud disturbances, just the familiar silence that had always surrounded the house. But something had shifted. Something had crossed the line between unstable and dangerous. No one heard it happen. No one saw it coming. And when the moment finally arrived, it came without warning. That evening, at approximately 6:36 p.m., Whitney called 911. Her voice was tight but composed. She reported a domestic dispute. She didn't go into much detail, but the dispatcher noted her tone. There was urgency, maybe fear. Then, mid-sentence, everything changed. Several loud, popping sounds echoed through the phone line. Gunshots. And then, silence. The dispatcher froze. A call like that, with an open line and no voice on the other end, triggered an immediate response. Law enforcement and emergency responders were dispatched to the address on South Road. Sirens lit up the evening sky as troopers and sheriff's deputies raced to the scene. Neighbors, hearing the commotion, stepped out of their homes in confusion. Something terrible had happened. They could feel it before they even knew the details. When officers arrived at the property around 6:50 p.m., they found Whitney's body outside the house. She had been shot. She wasn't breathing. Her phone, still nearby, was buzzing silently. Inside the home, the scene was even worse. Wilson Fowler and Anita Crandall were both dead, each killed by gunfire. Then, outside the home, standing near the doorway, was Joshua. He was holding a semi-automatic rifle. It was later confirmed that the weapon belonged to his father, legally owned and kept in the house. Officers ordered him to drop it, but he didn't. He stood there, eyes empty, body stiff. It wasn't clear if he was trying to provoke police, if he wanted them to shoot him, or if he was simply frozen in shock. Either way, the standoff didn't last long. Officers used tasers to subdue him. He went down hard but alive. And just like that, it was over. 3 dead. 1 arrested. The Fowler house was no longer just another home on South Road. It was a crime scene. A monument to the moment when silence turned deadly.
About 3 family members killed at a home in Grafton, Rensselaer County last night. Why state police say they now have Joshua Fowler under arrest for all 3 murders.
In the weeks that followed, the town of Grafton carried on, but nothing felt quite the same. Even though the house had been cleaned out and the police tape had come down, the chill lingered. Some said they couldn't drive past it without thinking about Whitney. Others couldn't stop wondering how a family could fall apart so violently in just a matter of minutes. Meanwhile, the investigation into Joshua Fowler continued quietly. Prosecutors worked through the case, reviewing autopsy reports, the weapon, witness interviews, and prior police responses to the home. At the heart of it all was the 911 call, the one Whitney had made just moments before her death. It was still hard for some of the responders to talk about. Hearing her voice cut off by gunfire was something they wouldn't forget. Some officers admitted off-record that they wished they'd arrived even a minute earlier. But those are the kinds of thoughts that haunt people, not help them. In court, Joshua appeared still and emotionless. During his arraignment, he didn't speak much, only responding to the judge when required. Reporters noted how blank he looked. He didn't cry. He didn't lash out. He just stood there, as if he hadn't fully understood what he had done. His defense attorneys pushed for psychological evaluations, and the court approved them, though the findings were sealed. What was clear from the beginning was that this wouldn't be a simple trial. It wasn't just about proving he pulled the trigger. Everyone knew he did. It was about understanding why. What pushed him to murder 3 people he lived with? One of them his wife. For Whitney's family, there were no answers that could bring peace. Her father, Wayne, tried to stay strong during public statements, but each word felt like a struggle. He talked about her laugh, her love for animals, her hope to one day work in pediatric nursing. He said she had her whole life ahead of her, and now she was gone because someone couldn't control his rage. Even her best friend had nothing but kind things to say about her, describing her as warm, selfless, and always putting others before herself. She never spoke ill of anyone, and even when she was going through her own struggles, she still showed up with a smile.
She was a really sweet person, kind, down to earth. She was just the most loving, kind person, would have been the most amazing mother. She was the most amazing person I ever met. Kind-hearted, sweet, kind, loved my kid. I hope he realizes the things that he did and knows that they're wrong and knows that he just took somebody's mom, somebody's family, somebody's sister, somebody's daughter, and he just took them away.
Eleanor Crandall, Joshua's mother, also gave statements, though hers were filled with a different kind of sorrow. She had predicted this. She had pleaded with others to take her son seriously, to get him help, to not write off his darkness as just mood swings. Now 3 people were dead, and her own son, her flesh and blood, was the one responsible. "I lost everything that day," she said. "My mother, my grandson, and my son too. Because I don't think he ever really came back from whatever snapped inside him." The legal system moved slowly, as it always does. Hearings were held behind closed doors. Motions were filed. The press coverage began to fade, and Grafton returned to its usual quiet. But the people who lived there didn't forget. They couldn't. Not when they passed the street sign for South Road. Not when they heard the name Fowler in casual conversation. Some residents admitted they had started locking their doors at night. Others said they checked in on their neighbors more often. Tragedy has a way of reshaping the routine, even in the smallest of places. One thing that became clear through all of it was how easy it is to miss the signs. Joshua Fowler didn't wake up one day and suddenly decide to become a killer. His story, like so many others, was a slow build. Years of silence, missed red flags, untreated issues, and bottled-up anger. And Whitney, kind as she was, had carried much of that weight alone. She had hoped to fix what was broken, to love him through the worst of it. But some people don't get better. Some people break others before they ever think to fix themselves. The tragedy also sparked quiet conversations around town about mental health and domestic abuse, topics that had long been avoided. A local church held a candlelight vigil not just for the victims, but for everyone who had suffered in silence. They lit 3 white candles for Whitney, Wilson, and Anita, and then they lit a 4th, for the people in the community still living in fear, still hoping things would change before it was too late. The Fowler case remains open as the trial moves slowly forward. Joshua Fowler remains behind bars, awaiting the full weight of the justice system. The district attorney has promised to pursue the maximum penalty, stating that the sheer brutality of the crime and the betrayal of trust deserved nothing less. His defense team has hinted at mental illness, unresolved trauma, and a lifetime of being ignored. But no argument can erase what happened. What makes this case so deeply painful isn't just the crime itself, it's the familiarity. It happened in a house like any other, to people who looked like any other family, in a town that felt like it could have been anywhere. that's what makes it terrifying. The realization that something this dark can grow in the most ordinary of places. That behind a plain door on a quiet street, a storm can be brewing, and no one will hear it until it breaks. Now, in this year 2025, this isn't the first time familicide has struck again. In fact, it's part of a haunting pattern that's unfolded across the United States in recent years. Quietly, relentlessly, and often unnoticed until it ends in bloodshed. The idea that someone could turn on their own family feels unthinkable, and yet it keeps happening. The word familicide might sound clinical, but its meaning is brutal when someone murders multiple members of their own family, often including a spouse, children, and sometimes even themselves. It is one of the rarest forms of homicide, but also one of the most disturbing. Not because it happens in the shadows, but because it happens in the places we believe are safest, our homes. In the last 5 years alone, the United States has recorded at least 450 known cases of familicide. That's nearly 90 per year. Or to put it another way, about 1 every 4 days. And those are just the ones that are officially classified. Experts believe the actual number is higher. In many cases, the label isn't applied even when multiple family members are killed. Sometimes it's recorded as domestic violence, sometimes as self-slaughtered. But no matter what it's called, the horror is the same. And what's even more terrifying, in the overwhelming majority of these cases, the killer is someone the victims trusted, a father, a husband, a son. Most are men, most are middle-aged, and most have a documented history of either domestic abuse, untreated mental illness, or both. These aren't crimes that appear out of nowhere. They build slowly, sometimes over years, until one day something snaps. Mental health professionals have long warned that unresolved psychological issues, especially in men, can manifest as rage turned inward and then outward. Depression, paranoia, delusions, and suicidal ideation are common precursors in familicide. But so is silence. Many of these men never seek help. Or if they do, they stop showing up. They isolate. They spiral. And the people closest to them, wives, children, mothers, become both witnesses and eventual victims. Financial stress is also a recurring theme. Job loss, eviction, divorce. The sense of losing control over one's life becomes a dangerous trigger, especially for men raised to believe they are providers. When they feel they've failed, some don't just take their own lives, they take their families too. As twisted as it sounds, some even believe they are saving their loved ones from future pain. That delusion becomes the final justification for something unspeakable. Just this year, 2025 has already seen several horrific examples. In California, a man shot his wife and 3 children before killing himself, after posting a long Facebook rant about losing his job. In Texas, a father strangled his twin daughters during a custody battle. In Pennsylvania, a mother drowned her 2 sons in a bathtub and calmly waited for police, later telling investigators she was protecting them from the world. Each story different, each ending the same. And in nearly every one of those homes, the signs were there. Friends who noticed the mood swings, teachers who saw the bruises, neighbors who heard the screaming but stayed silent. Police reports that were never followed up. Therapists who warned but weren't believed. These are not just isolated tragedies. They are failures of systems, of support, and of the people around them. Familicide doesn't erupt like lightning. It brews like a storm, slow, dark, and ignored, until one day It breaks everything in its path. And as we try to make sense of the Fowler case, it becomes clear that it doesn't stand alone. It's part of something bigger. A silent epidemic that no one wants to talk about until it's too late. A reminder that the monsters we fear are sometimes not strangers, but people we live with. Now I want to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think it was really a matter of mental health left untreated? Or was this something much darker? Something building for years behind closed doors? Could this have been prevented? Or was it always bound to happen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.